This next question is for Bill. If a pool appliance and outlet have been submerged in salt water, can you replace just the appliance and not the outlet if it is suitably dry? What negative effect would a saltwater encroached outlet have on a new replacement appliance?
Okay, let me take the second question first. Prior to doing that, I'll reiterate what I said a minute ago. I produced a set of handouts. Some of them are reduced. You may have to have a magnifying glass or a microscope to read the text, but we're trying not to kill trees. There are enough dead trees up here from the hurricane.
Bill, let me interrupt right now. It's a perfect way or time to announce it. Our website on nespapool.org, all the information and materials plus this program will be kind of condensed and put on there, and his handout will be on the website in a larger format after it.
And I've got another one from, if you look at mine, you'll see that there's some guidance in there from a couple of manufacturers. I have another manufacturer that didn't get into it. Most of the work that deals with my area, which is electrical, is going to probably wind up in the lap of an electrician and not a pool builder or a pool maintainer, service person, or whatever. And so one of the things that, to go back to that old question before I get into the technical part, in your contracts, particularly in light of this, you also, in addition to talking about additional expenses for yourselves, you need to recognize and put in there that you may hire subcontractors or subconsultants to help you with any kind of storm-related cleanup associated with this, where you're dealing with areas of specialization that, for example, require a state licensing, a state permit, a local license, or whatever. And electricity is one of them. As I said a minute ago, there are really two problems associated with the electrical end of this, and they don't go away when the water goes away. One of them's water, and the other one is the salts. And of course, in ocean water, it's not just sodium chloride. There's this vast variety of organic and inorganic salts that are in the water, and all of them are corrosive, and all of them reduce the resistance of whatever the material is. In other words, they increase the electrical conductivity, and when the water goes away, they tend to dry out on the surfaces of the electrical equipment. Consequently, what you're going to see in general in these bulletins that I've handed out, and it gets to this question of outlets, let's take two different cases. One is a piece of plug and cord connected equipment out there. For example, I've got a plug and cord connected pump, because up here that's what we do, right, when we winterize our pools. And so the question is, do I have to replace the pump, or do I just replace the receptacle, or what? And the answer is you replace the receptacle as well as that, and we'll get into the wiring in the next one. And you do that because when it dries out, then you've still got, even though you can't see it, you've got salt that's embedded inside the plastic of that receptacle, which is conductive. And typically, the thing you worry about is not whether or not it's going to raise your electric bill. The question is whether it's going to flash and set your house on fire 2 months down the road, which it can do. And that can be a long-term process. The arc tracking itself is not something that necessarily just goes wham out of the blue. And so everybody that I know of, including me, recommends that, particularly with respect to outlets and that type of electrical equipment, that be completely replaced. Now, if it's hardwired, you got another issue. And again, I'll talk about the wiring itself. Looks like it's going to be in the next one, so we won't worry about that right now. But the same thing is true with electrical connections, right? The most vulnerable locations in an electrical power system, powering anything else out there, are the connections. And again, the problem becomes not only the fact that you've got salt in there, but it's extremely corrosive, And when that occurs, then it causes the conductors to oxidize. The oxidation is not as conductive as the salts. And so what's recommended, for example, if you've got a pool light and it's sitting out there in a J-box connected and you got some wire nuts in there, you know, you're going to toss those wire nuts, and we'll talk about the wire in a minute. You're probably going to toss the wire too. But you certainly don't want to leave anything associated with a connection in there. And as I said earlier, you want to toss the circuit boards if they've been underwater. If for no other reason than 3 months down the line, you don't want to be calling this guy over here or one of his people saying, well, my heater's not working right. It's not on fire, but it's just not working right. Well, the answer is you may very well have salt damage on that board that's affecting the operation of it, and you're never going to get that out economically.
So the crux of it is, if it got infiltrated with salt water, from the conduits to the timer boxes, to the outlets, we should look at replacing.
No, let me go to that a little bit more. There's some things that you can do in some installations that where you don't have to replace certain items, but that's really kind of a part of the next question, so we'll let him go to that, and then I'll address that, if that's okay.
Yeah, that's fine, yeah. But you-
I wanted to ask Bill, what about the wires that we connect with the potting compounds in the light niches themselves? Are they going to need to be replaced?
Yeah, if the potting, if the potting is still intact, and don't forget, when you have a storm surge like this, and, you know, we feel your pain. There's several of us from Florida and Texas up here. We get this stuff a lot more often than you do, to the point in South Louisiana, insurance adjusters have what they call slab jobs, right? That's when they go in, there's nothing left but the slab, and that's very common. Pools filled with debris and everything else. But if you're looking at something that's potted, then you may very well be able to make that last, provided that the potting has not scoured out. But if you're going to leave that in there, I would strongly suggest that you put that on your list of things to watch and things probably to test electrically over the lifetime of it. Now, the testing is very easy to do, and you guys can do it because you're basically looking at a continuity test. Just to make sure that that has not deteriorated to the point that you take it out. And I understand where you're coming from on that. If you can avoid, particularly in a concrete, shotcrete, gunite pool, if you can avoid pulling out that wet niche, then you're going to save the customer a lot of money, because now you're talking about putting away your jackhammer. So if it's potted, and one of the things that if you've been to my classes, you know that I preach this idea of potting these connections. That may save you a bunch in the future when you rebuild this pool if you go in there and pot that stuff, including the stuff that's not required to be potted by the code. And we'll get into that a little bit.
The next question's for Bill again. Does a new electrical line need to be run from the fuse box to the pool if the line has been submerged? How do you check the line for damage?
Okay. This gets into, I think, the question you were asking and a couple of others, so let me address it. And it's a two-pronged answer. And I'm not trying to evade this. I'm going to give you two direct answers depending on your situation. If this is a residential installation that we're dealing with, chances are you're dealing with what the industry refers to as non-metallic sheath cable, NM, NMB. Most people call it Romex. Out in the real world, which, you know, is actually a trade name, but that's what it's used, that's what people call it. And those cables are not listed or tested for submersion in water. And consequently, if you're coming back and rewiring a pool and the wiring that goes out, for example, to your pad and some of those others is NM, it's got to go. The reason why is that the cable itself has a paper insert in it, which is just going to sit there and wick that salt water up into the cable. Additionally, the insulation on the cable is, while it may last a while, it is susceptible to damage from salts because it was never intended that it be used for that. The good news is that NM's pretty cheap. There are some other issues that get to that as well, and that is that some of you know I sit on the code panel that writes this stuff, and we are making changes in the code, particularly associated with feeders to pool-related panels, where we're no longer allowing cables on that. We're going to require conduit. So anytime you get into a situation like that, and of course, if you're familiar with the code, you already know that we've required you to use an insulated ground wire for those kinds of installations, precisely so we don't get issues associated with ground current. I would strongly encourage you, before you ever pull 1 inch of wire or have an electrician do it, to make sure that they know what the authority having jurisdiction, what the building inspector is going to require under his local amendments to the code, and whether or not he's going to even allow you to pull NM cable back in there, or waterproof MC, or whatever, or whether or not you're going to have to put conduit in. Now, if you are in a commercial situation where the wiring is in conduit, unless it's aluminum conduit, typically the conduit's savable, right? You just flush it out with water. If the wiring that's been pulled through it is a water-resistant wiring, like, for example, XHHW, which some of you have probably heard of, or THWN, or one of those, which is the common stuff. If you go out here to one of the big box stores, to their electrical department, and just start looking at their loose wire, you're going to see that stuff, because that's what electricians typically pull these days. That may be okay. An electrician who knows how to do this knows how to run what's called a Megger test, where basically what you're going to do is you're going to flush that wiring down, and then you're going to expose it to a high voltage and test the insulation on that wiring to determine whether or not it has to be replaced. Right? Typically, you're not going to do that in a home because you don't have that kind of wiring. Additionally, you want to make, you are probably, if it's savable, you need to watch for corrosion. You're probably going to want to take the loose ends, cut them off, restrip the wires, put them under that way with clean copper. If it's aluminum, I would recommend that you get rid of it, because that stuff is extremely susceptible to corrosion from salts, and you're just going to wind up having all kinds of problems with it in the long term. Yes, sir.
Well, my company, we basically have a policy, the storm stuff with our commercial and residential work. If your equipment, because we do a lot of stuff on Long Beach Island and all, if your equipment was underwater, I have customers there, C-Series motors been underwater, was under 5 feet of water. That motor's toast.
Oh, yeah, that motor's toast.
Done. Now, what our policy is that we'll replace the equipment, and then the electrician must check the wiring and hook it up. So
Yes.
we're not even getting into the heaters or anything like that. That's electrical. So we're not even addressing electrical problems. Anything that was underwater is done. I mean, I have brand new, like not even a year old, all not to Hayward man over there, but brand new IntelliFlow pumps, not even a year old, underwater. They're done. You have to get a new one. I mean, that's, if you want to try to save it, that's up to you, but, and the electrician is going to have to hook that up, not me.
Typically, small motors and things like that, like you're talking about, it's really not cost effective to try to clean them out. Now, if you're out here on a municipal pool that's got, 50 horsepower pumps, then by all means, and this is the reason why I said, have a good electrician on your team, because they're going to know how to do this. There's some things they can do with the manufacturers that may save some of that equipment.
All right, Bill, we're gonna move things along
Yeah.
in the interest of time.
I'm going to just jump in just 1 second here. Do you have specific questions? Do you want electrical, how many people want some electrical questions answered, or do you want structural things? Because I've got some structural people
Yeah.
up here now. I'd like to get those, and I know Bill will stay after a little longer to deal with all the electrical issues. So if you want us to open it up to questions out here, I'm sure the panel would be agreeable to that before we lose some of our panel people. Okay, some structural questions? Okay.
Okay.
Go for it.